I'd like to now welcome our witnesses. They are here today as a resource for the committee during its clause-by-clause consideration of the bill. So with us today, we have, again, Mr. Mark Sean. Welcome back to INDU. He is the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategy and Innovation Policy Sector. And we're hopeful that Mr. Paul Morrison, Manager, Corporate Insolvency and Competition Directorate, will be able to join us. So we were on Clause 1 of the bill. And I had a speaking list. My apologies. I wanted a little shout out to our legislative clerk, Mr. Jacques Maziad. Welcome back to INDU. Thank you for your assistance. So we had a speaking list last meeting where we left off. We were on, Mr. Poliev had the floor, and we had Mr. Assassi and Mr. Duval on the speaking list. I see Mr. Lemire has his hand up as well, so I'll add him to the list. I'm just going to check and see if Mr. Poliev, you still had the floor. I wanted to know if you were, if you still needed the floor. The floor is yours.
I don't need the floor anymore, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So we will now go to MP Assassi. You have the floor.
Madam Chair, I have to confess, I'm not quite sure why I had my hand up last time, but I'm sure as we go through today's session and we go through every one of the various clauses, there will be ample opportunity to flag some issues that may be of concern.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to check with the clerk because last time we had Mr. Duval was here as a substitute. And I had him on the list, and because I can't see in the room, I don't know if he is actually now in the room or if it's still Mr. Bacharach.
I believe we're waiting for Mr. Duval to join up.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So what I will do is I will keep him on the list, and as soon as he arrives, I will give him the floor. But we'll go to MP Lemire. Vous avez la parole.
The floor is yours. My intention here was to make sure that we could proceed to the clause-by-clause study. I think it would be important for Mr. Duval to be here for this. And I do have a question in these circumstances. What's the impact for government to adopt C-253 if we agree we know it won't have a financial impact on the government? Would there be other consequences for the government, or is this purely ideological given a party's position regarding this bill? The question is for me? Thank you for the question. Regarding the consequences of this bill for the government, there are several. If it is enacted, there would be a few impacts. First of all, for the insolvency system in Canada, because the government manages the system, if there's a bigger change, such as the bill proposes, there would be a few consequences regarding communications and the continued analysis of impacts on the financial sector and the economy and SMEs. Secondly, for any type of insolvency, the government is a creditor. With this bill, there would be a big change, and the government, there would be impacts on the government because at times the government is an unsecured creditor, and with a change like this one, there would be consequences. Therefore, the bill has two consequences. First of all, the management system for the insolvency system, and secondly, for the government as an unsecured creditor. Thank you. Thank you.
INDU, we had you on the list to speak last time, so I will turn the floor over to you. MP Duval, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for everybody being here. I want to talk to Mr. Sean about the last week he had mentioned about the federally regulated pensions are protected because they require to be 100% funded. Um, but I understand there's a lot of federally regulated pensions that aren't 100% funded. Is that true? Like if you look at Canada Post, are they 100% funded? And do you know what the deficit is?
I don't have the Canada Post unfunded liability currently before me, but maybe I can clarify because I think I talked a little bit last week about how the process of a federally regulated pension was held. So the standard requires that the pension be at 100%. But then obviously there's actuarial valuations that actually determine the relative level of funding, and then a process by which to make up that gap. So to be absolutely clear, the federally regulated defined benefit pension plans are subject to the funding requirements that are set out in the Pension Benefit Standards Act of 1985 and the Pension Benefit Standards Regulations of 1985. And those plans are required to be 100% funded on a solvency basis, but with any shortfall paid by the employer within 5 years in order to help ensure that plans have sufficient assets to provide for all benefits, both while the plan is ongoing and in the event of a plan termination. So if the latest, sorry.
So Mr. Sean, I understand, but what I'm trying to get at is Canada Post has a huge deficit. And they've had a 5-year plan, but they've also asked for extensions after extension, and they're not paying into it. So the deficit gets higher and higher. So who is going to be responsible for that if something happened?
So in the case of an amendment, so when an actuarial evaluation occurs, the plan sponsor then needs to be making special payments on each of the subsequent 5 years to be able to make up that gap. Any variation from special payments needs to be approved by the pension regulator. In this case, that would be OSFI in the case of the federal government. So if there is a plan that currently has an unfunded pension liability and the plan sponsor is not making that up, that's under the approval, the express approval of the plan of the pension superintendent for the purposes of extenuating circumstances, and that's the bar that the regulator sets to ensure that it truly is extraordinary circumstances. I talked last week about the fact that that's often in cooperation. So in the case of Air Canada, for instance, which was a federally regulated pension, the deferral of continued pension payments was with the approval of the union for the purposes of allowing for a market rebalancing and a return to normal returns that ultimately did occur and ultimately allowed for the plan sponsor to be able to make up that unfunded pension liability and return to good solvency.
Right, but at the same time with Air Canada, I think it was Mr. Flaherty at that time actually put limits on the dividends and executive pay to stop such a large deficit until the fund was going. But my other question is the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives study, which was the lion's share, illustrated companies with defined benefit plans have the capacity to fund their pensions, but they just don't have to. So do you think that after listening to all the witnesses, they were saying a change is needed, it's time. So if we don't do something, then companies are just not going to have to because they're not obligated to. So we got to put some pressure on them to make those payments.
So as we discussed a little bit last week, so in the case of, and I can really kind of point to the choices, the policy choices that have been made at federal level. Federal level, as indicated, the standard that companies are held to is 100% funded on a solvency basis with a gap that needs to be made up over the subsequent 5 years. And so I do think that companies actually are obligated federally to ensure that they are actually keeping their plans well funded and continue to have to make payments. That's obviously not the case necessarily in all provinces, but we do think that there are significant unintended economic consequences of providing a super priority as opposed to potentially looking at the solvency requirements that are held in other jurisdictions that would actually ensure that the plan is well funded while it is in operation, as opposed to trying to kind of make up the difference for when it's in insolvency.
Mr. Sean, can you do you have any data to demonstrate to me that Canadian companies with defined benefit plans are currently experiencing liquidity problems? How many companies are there, and what is the exposure of the dollars?
So each province pension superintendent often does provide additional information about the plans under their respective coverage. I don't have that information handy, but I can say that OSFI, for the federal purposes, does keep track of the overall numbers of plan sponsors and those entities and their degree of fundedness. And as indicated, in the case of a federally regulated plan, actually the federal plan actually requires an actuarial evaluation annually should the plan be less than 100% funded on a solvency basis. And so in terms of the general liquidity needs, I would say, obviously, it's extraordinary times. We've just been through a global pandemic that's produced significant challenges onto the overall economy. There are a number of additional liquidity measures that have been put in place to try and ensure that firms can stay active and solvent during this time period, at all levels of size of company, all the way from obviously general liquidity measures that were available to all companies, like the Canada Emergency Bank business account, all the way through to very, very large companies that obviously did have access to bridge financing through the large employer emergency finance facility. And
my last question, sorry, Mr. Sean, for cutting you off there, but I know we got time, very little time, but INDU demonstrated, even giving the pension deficit deemed trust status, it did not result in a tsunami of liquidations. So why is it that we are, I don't see, as Mr. Poilievre has said, I don't see a lineup of business people here as witnesses protecting what they're saying is the sky will fall. And in fact, what I'm hearing is a lot of people are saying enough is enough, okay, that we need to change the law to protect the pensioners from deferred wages that they've worked for and not to be taken up by the global market.
Yeah, so deemed trust is a complicated piece of insolvency, and so it's difficult to generalize on the basis of intellects with respect to deemed trust, and that's an issue that remains at issue in a number of potential current cases. To your broader point though about relative levels of fundedness, so it is worth noting that the current funded ratio for DB pension plans belonging to companies in the S&P TSX Composite Index increased from 90.8% to 91.2% funded over the past 12 months. And so we are seeing high levels of fundedness, particularly for those plans that are held to high funded solvency ratios, like they are in the federal zone. In terms of the economic rationale for the potential implications of a super priority, which we discussed, I don't know if it was Mr. Poilievre's urging or others, but we did, I believe, through the clerk receive. We received, and then I believe the clerk received an indication from the Canadian Association of Pension Managers, their strong concerns about the economic implications of a super priority. So just to note, there has been some, but I can't speak to the others. All I can say is we do worry about the potential implications of a decline in restructurings and not liquidations.
Right, and pensioners are really worried about saving their pensions and not losing it. But I'm going to ask this to the chair. Madam Chair, I'm just wondering, are we going to be going clause by clause, or are we just going to be asking questions all day? I was hoping that we, on clause 1 that we're dealing with, that we start having a vote on it and to get down to business.
So we are doing clause by clause. I'm waiting to make sure that everyone who has a question regarding each clause has the opportunity to be heard. So you were the last person on the list for clause 1. So I'm just going to ask if there are any other comments or questions regarding clause 1 before I turn it over for recorded division. Are there any other questions or comments regarding clause 1? Seeing none. Okay. Shall clause 1 carry? I will turn it to the clerk for recorded division because I can't see everybody.
Mr. Badaway.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Jahowri.
Yes.
Mr. Asasi.
Yes.
Ms. Jazek,
Yes.
Mr. Poiliev,
Yes.
Mr. Dreeshen,
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli,
Yes.
Mr. Patzer,
Yes.
Monsieur Lemieux,
Oui.
and Mr. Duval.
Yes.
11 yeas.
Okay, carried. We'll now start with clause 2. Are there any questions or comments regarding clause 2? If so, please use the raised hand function of your, and if you're in the room, please signal to me so I can see you, and I'll put you on the speakers list. So are there any questions or comments regarding clause 2? Okay, MP Asasi.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. With regards to clause 2, and this is true of every clause that we're considering today, obviously there are potential impacts on beneficiaries, on employers, and on other creditors as well. So I was wondering if we could ask Mr. Shan to perhaps unpack what the impact of clause 2 would be on all three of those groups.
Thank you for the question. So clause 2, this section extends the super priority for unremitted employee contributions and unpaid employer normal cost contributions owing to the pension plans to any unpaid special payments and unfunded pension liability. And it also extends the super priority for unremitted employee contributions and unpaid employer normal cost contributions owing to the pension plans to any unpaid special payments and unfunded pension liability. And so, as noted, this essentially creates a super priority that would place unfunded pension liabilities and unremitted pension contributions. So it's worth noting unremitted pension contributions, actually those contributions that would have been a subject to a payroll contemplation in the lead up to an insolvency already have a super priority. So the major piece here is really the extension of the super priority to the overall and including unfunded pension liability, including in the federal case of those special payments that were required to be made over the subsequent 5 years to make up for the gap. What that essentially does is place them above preferred claims in the case of restructuring, and also then above unsecured creditors and secured creditors in the case of a restructuring. And so in many cases, this would mean that essentially the unfunded pension liability would take precedence and potentially leave significantly less obviously available in the estate for the purposes of secured creditors and unsecured creditors. In this case, because it's a super priority, thereby meaning it's an automatic. For the case of restructuring, this may mean very well that actually the unfunded pension liability is such that the assets remaining are simply insufficiently interesting or possible to allow for a restructuring to occur. Which would mean that the entity would proceed into liquidation and that people would be paid on a pro rata basis. We would essentially be prioritizing the unsecured claim of pension plans of unfunded pension liabilities above those of other unsecured creditors, which can include small and medium-sized enterprises, other suppliers, other providers of services and assets to the now liquidated entity. So in the case of clause 2, this respects to BIA liquidation. So when in a liquidation, this would essentially prioritize and provide that super priority for the unfunded pension liability. As discussed, we see impact on both the cost of credit, the availability of the entity to be able to proceed to restructuring, and then should they be in a position to continue to potentially allow for them to access the necessary liquidity to remain ongoing.
MP Asasi, do you have any other questions?
Yes, just as a follow-up. So you're essentially saying that this would be adverse in interest to the employees as well on certain occasions. And the fundamental question that I have is obviously over the course of the past decade, we've seen many companies manage to work through liquidation and actually manage to save the farm, if you will. So what would the impact of this have been had it been in effect? All these companies that we understand have restructured would probably, some of them at least, would not have had that opportunity. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so obviously we think, you know, the kind of general premise is that the best way to ensure the ongoing vitality of and the security of retirement income is for a going concern entity to be continuing to make pension payments and have its pension plan ongoing. Winding up at any given moment, just given the vagaries of the market, obviously you leave some risk that on a solvency basis they may not have sufficient funds. And so the best way to continue that is obviously to have the entity continue to be economically active, allow themselves to be restructured, maintain the jobs of the entity, as well as then the continued opportunities for pension payments. So I guess there's two considerations for a super priority and the potential implications of a lack of restructurings. One on the super priority is that it's not in all cases necessarily the case that the assets in hand actually would still allow for full payment of the unfunded pension liability. There are actually instances where the unfunded pension liability exceeds that of the assets on hand of the entity. And so in fact, even in some cases with a super priority, you still may actually have individuals that potentially will not receive the fullness of their pension promise. There's obviously also an implication in terms of the considerations for active workers who are making active payments to the pension plan on the premise that they will one day be able to retire. And obviously, if the entity is unable to restructure and instead proceeds towards a liquidation, those individuals need to find new sources of active income, and potentially with or without the pension. And even if there was a super priority, as I said, may either be fully funded, but certainly would only be fully funded at the contributions to date of their participation. But then when we actually look at some of the restructurings that have occurred, those active pension plans have allowed for the continuation of those payments to both retirees and active workers. And so, there's a few successful restructurings that have involved a significant number. We've talked to Air Canada before. In terms of the employees, this was almost over 29,000 employees that were covered by the plan. And as a function of that restructuring, there was a plan of compromise and arrangement that allows for the pensions to continue to be paid without reduction. In the case of Abitibi-Bowater, this was again another 10,000 employees covered by the plan, where a restructuring plan of compromise and arrangement allowed for the pensions to continue to be paid without reduction. And even in some cases where there potentially wasn't the allowance of a plan to allow for its continued operation, in the case of, for instance, in the case of Hollinger, the plan was 100% funded on a wind-up basis as a result of a distribution from the plan of arrangement, in that the restructuring produced significant financial outcomes in terms of asset sales and other measures that allowed for the plan to be terminated and ultimately for it to be 100% funded on that wind-up basis. So there are a number of these indications where we have seen companies enter into restructurings and allow for the ongoing participation of the plan. And so that is the potential concern vis-a-vis the potential super priority of unfunded pension liabilities as a disincentive.
Thank you.
Okay, I have MP Jacek, then MP Lemire. MP Jacek, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to pick up a little bit on where Mr. Duval was going. There's no question that during the hearings that we've had at this committee, that the overwhelming majority of witnesses were very firmly in support of this bill. And quite honestly, I'm a recipient of OMERS, a defined benefit plan, a very fortunate recipient of that pension plan. And I've received a number of pieces of correspondence from OMERS in support of this bill. So you, Mr. Shan, are clearly not in favor. You've detailed your concerns. But to what extent have you consulted Can you give us some examples of support for your position? I don't want to in any way question your credibility because you're obviously extremely knowledgeable, but it would be really good to have some specific examples of organizations, banks, lenders, quite honestly, anybody who is opposed for the reasons that you have given us.
Yeah, and it should be clear that this is an analytical view, not a personal one. I come to this from the perspective of simply the analysis that we've been able to undertake as the government department responsible for this statute. So and so I'm trying to bring to bear what we have heard and seen and analyzed and understood through the research and other that we've undertaken. It is worth noting that leading up to the changes that we made to the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act and the Companies Creditors Arrangements Act, alongside significant changes as well to the Canada Business Corporations Act, as part of the Retirement Security Project in 2019, we held significant cross-country consultations that actually were wide-ranging in terms of the number of options and considerations that we raised vis-a-vis the possibilities for enhancing retirement income security. And those retirement income security consultations did look at a number of potential options for implementation, including that of a super priority for unfunded pension liabilities. We heard from insolvency professionals, we heard from the Canadian Bankers Association, we heard from the Association of Pension Managers. We had submissions from FEDCO, various federal employers, pension experts, pension benefit experts, credit unions, and others. And what we heard were the subsequent piece of legislation that emerged from that was clear in terms of the consultations, and so I think it is worth going back to the many entreaties that were made as part of that. Obviously, many of them were similar to what you heard in the witness testimony, suggesting that there is positive support for a super priority for unfunded pension liability. Sometimes with some caveats around the notion that obviously recognizing—
Madam Chair, point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, we have a point of order on the floor, Mr. Doyle.
I'm just wondering if we could have some precise questions and answers and not be going on. We have to finish this, and we're just going on, and time is running out. And I think it's just proper that we do this clause by clause. Of course, there's important questions, but we don't have to be going on with the long-term answers. Thank you.
So I want to make sure we have not had a chance to have officials prior to last week and this week. So I want to make sure all members have a chance to ask their questions. I'll ask that your questions be succinct with respect to the clause that we're on, if possible, so that we can make sure that we can get through it. But I will yield the floor back to the MP Jacek. Mr. Sean, if you could wrap up a little bit on that response, and we'll check if MP Jacek has any other questions before we go to the next MP. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the summary is just, I think it's worth looking at the consultations that were held in 2019, and then there was a similar statutory review of the Act in 2014 that also yielded significant amounts of consultation and response.
So would I be correct then in saying that you're going to look carefully at those consultations and look at potentially other ideas to support workers in this potential situation of losing their pension, their defined benefit? I mean, where are you at in that process?
So we did changes to the law in 2019 as a function of significant consultation. It did make changes to both the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, the Companies Creditors Arrangements Act, the Canada Business Corporations Act, amongst others, and those projects of law are actually in their infancy. They've only been implemented for a short period of time. They included, a duty of good faith in insolvency proceedings, required for boards of directors and officers to contemplate and have the capacity to consider additional additional issues of well-being and financial vitality of their organizations, including that of their pension plans. And it specifically has indicated that companies will have an obligation to comply or explain with a requirement to bring before their shareholders the measures by which they are contemplating and considering the well-being of their workers and pensioners in their ongoing operations. And so there has been a number of shifts in the law, but we do obviously continue to look back to those consultations and to continue to hear and meet with interveners and stakeholders to make sure that we are canvassing for any and all good ideas that would improve the overall state of retirement income security and the well-being of pensioners and workers.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I know we have MP Lemire. Vous avez votre main levée aussi.
Le but de mon intervention, Madame la...
I actually wanted to speak on a similar point to Mr. Duval's. Out of respect for workers, pensioners, and given the tens of thousands of emails that we've all received in support of this bill, we have to move forward. I would just invite the witness, whose objectivity was kind of questioned by Mr. Jasik's preamble. I'd just like to encourage us all to get shorter answers so that we can get to the end of the agenda. Thank you for that. Every member must have an opportunity to ask their questions of the witness. So were there other members who had questions on Clause 2?
With respect to Clause number 2. Okay, seeing none. What I will do is, shall Clause 2 carry? I will turn it over to the clerk for recorded division.
Mr. Badaway.
No.
Ms. Lambropoulos.
No.
Mr. Jahouri.
Against.
Mr. Assassi. Sorry, Mr. Assassi.
Nope.
Ms. Jasik.
Against.
Mr. Poiliev.
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Yes.
Mr. Patzer.
Yes.
Monsieur Lemire.
Oui.
Mr. Duval.
Yes.
And Mr. Poiliev. I'm sorry, we didn't catch that. It was the vote on, seem to be having some technical issue there. It's the question on Clause 2. Mr. Poiliev.
Yes, in favor. Sorry, I had a technical problem on my end too.
Thank you. 6 yeas, 5 nays.
Okay, carried. We'll now move to Clause 3. If you have any questions, comments with respect to Clause 3, if you could please raise your hand to let me know. Hands raised for Clause 3. Okay. We will then go to the vote for Clause 3. Shall the Clause 3 carry? And I will turn it to the clerk.
Mr. Badaway.
No.
Ms. Lambropoulos.
No.
Mr. Jahouri.
No.
Mr. Assassi.
You got this one. Even you.
Mr. Assassi. Perhaps he can't hear us. We'll come back. Ms. Jasik.
Against.
Mr. Poiliev.
In favor.
Mr. Dreeshen.
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli.
In favor.
Mr. Patzer.
Yes.
Monsieur Lemire.
Oui.
And Mr. Duval.
Yes.
And Mr. Sassi.
Against.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Carried. We'll now go to clause 4. Do we have any questions or comments with respect to clause 4? If so, please raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. I'm sorry, it's hard to see in the room. I don't think I see any hands up in there. Okay, so seeing no questions or comments with respect to clause 4, I will turn it over to the clerk. Shall clause 4 carry?
Mr. Badaway.
No.
Ms. Lambropoulos.
No.
Mr. Jahouri.
Against.
Mr. Essasi.
No.
Ms. Jazik.
No.
Mr. Poiliev.
Yes.
Mr. Dreeshen.
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Monsieur Lemire.
Oui.
And Mr. Duval.
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
So clause 4 carries. We will now go to clause 5. Are there any questions or comments with respect to clause 5? If so, please raise your hands. Okay, not seeing any questions or comments with respect to clause 5. I will ask that the clerk take the recorded division for clause 5. Shall clause 5 carry?
Mr. Badaway.
Against.
Ms. Lambropoulos.
Against.
Mr. Jahouri.
Against.
Mr. Essasi.
Against.
Ms. Jazik.
Against.
Mr. Poiliev.
In favor.
Mr. Dreeshen.
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli.
Yes.
Mr. Patzer.
Yes.
Monsieur Lemire.
Oui.
And Mr. Duval.
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Okay, carried. We'll now go to, we have a new clause 6 from MP Poilievre. And with that, I'd like to open the floor for any questions or comments with respect to that. I believe it was circulated MP Poilievre last meeting. So we all have it in front of us if you'd like to speak to it.
Yes, it just gives a grace period of 3 years for coming into force. That will allow companies who might be in a difficult financial position to ready themselves to bolster their balance sheets and properly fund their pension fund plans in order to stay solvent. My worry is that if we go ahead with the bill without any coming into force delay, you'll have some companies that are on the verge of bankruptcy that will no longer be able to borrow money because lenders of lower grade debt will say that the risk is too high given that the pension obligations would come before the loans. And if that happens, what might occur is that the company would just go bankrupt now. And ironically, the pensioners would be in a worse position than at present. If a company has an underfunded pension and it goes bankrupt because it can't secure lower grade debt to stay a going concern, then it would not only would the workers all lose their jobs, but there would be no time for the company to recover its financial position and bolster the pension. So you could lose jobs and pensions if the change in this law is too abrupt. So the solution, I think some of the witnesses agreed this was the best solution, including witnesses who supported the overall bill, is just to have a coming into force of about 3 years. So business can focus aggressively on bolstering their pension plans, perhaps buying an insurance product, a large-scale strategic insurance product that will back up the pension, thus reassuring lending markets that their loans are in safe hands. So I think this is a good amendment. It'll actually make this bill much more successful. I think it actually makes the bill stronger, not weaker, and it's good for pensioners. So I encourage everyone to support it.
Okay, so I'll open up the floor for debate on that that amendment. Are there any questions or comments with respect to that? Okay. Oh, MP Jacek?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We certainly did hear some testimony talking about a 3-year transition period, but perhaps Mr. Shan could give us his opinion in relation to this as a possibility.
Thank you. So obviously, you know, in an unfunded pension liability, as we've noted, particularly depending on the jurisdiction, can be quite large. 3 years is not a lot of time, depending on the nature of the markets at the time. So one concern, well, there's a few things that potentially that are considerations that could be given. So one is obviously that employers that are already in financial difficulty could have difficulty reducing their UPLs, their unfunded pension liabilities during that transition period. And lenders who face the risk of non-payment from borrowers with a large unfunded pension liability when the super priority comes into force may use the transition period not actually to put pressure on the employer and the plan sponsor to make pension payments, but instead to pay debt instead of reducing that unfunded pension liability, so that when the transition period ends, they are essentially made whole rather than the pension fund. The other is that employers may actually decide to discontinue defined benefit pension plans or group insurance plans during the transition period to avoid the impact of higher insolvency priorities on credit availability. So either winding things up or closing health insurance, dental, or other plans because this is going to impact their bottom line. And lenders with exposure or employers with unfunded pension liabilities or group insurance plans may pressure employers to take such action before an insolvency. It's also worth noting that one of the things, so there's 3 categories of super priority within this bill. There's unfunded pension liabilities. There's also the claim for terminated group insurance plans, but there's also severance pay. And obviously severance pay can include many things, including the potential for severance for significant executives. And so one thought is also that if this is ultimately going to lead to a liquidation, you may actually see some gaming behavior wherein people increase their overall severance payments, particularly for particular cadre of their employees, because they're actually recognizing that they potentially might be heading towards a liquidation and that their severance pay would have a super priority above all secured and unsecured creditors.
Okay, if I could just follow up. So it would be possible for an employer to shift from a defined benefit plan during that time period. How does that work? Like, can an employer do that in just the normal course of events? Surely it's part of union negotiations that there is a defined benefit plan. Maybe you could just elaborate on that piece.
So it's going to vary on a case-by-case basis. And it's going to vary based on the pension regulations that they're being held to. But plan sponsors can ultimately make a determination dependent on their unique circumstances to ultimately terminate and close a plan, or to potentially propose to their workforce to convert a plan from a defined benefit to a defined contribution or to some other retirement scheme. They're obviously on the hook for the pension payments that have been made to date to those individuals, but the reality is, for active workers potentially within one of those organizations, they may actually find themselves now no longer having access to a defined benefit pension plan, but a defined contribution plan, so that the employer can essentially minimize the risk of the unfunded liability that's been accrued to date for those workers. On health benefits, it really depends on the nature of the negotiation between the workers and the employer, because there's often changes that can be made to plan sponsorship in those regards. And so the employer could simply say, as a function of these ongoing liabilities and the risks that they pose, we've chosen to scale back benefits, or potentially to change the nature of the insurance plans that are on offer. Sometimes those can be made as a function of a collective bargaining agreement, but depending on the employer, sometimes that may not be required.
So it's possible they can do it arbitrarily in some instances.
In some instances, it is possible, and obviously dependent on the nature of the situation. If it's deemed to be extraordinary, they may very well find other mechanisms to justify it. But in the case of a collective bargaining, it may also be used as a negotiating tool to say this is my approach, and now kind of articulate the best potential outcome, knowing that our plan is potentially to either wind up this plan or potentially to convert it, either in the case of insurance or in the case of a pension.
So in other words, this 3-year transition period does pose all sorts of risks to the workers, to the pensioners.
Well,
possibly.
My colleagues at the Department of Finance would be far better placed to be able to comment on some of this, but I do know that there has been contemplation from time to time, for instance, about the shortening of the time period, for instance, of special payments, and whether or not special payments should go from a 5-year payback period to a 3-year payback period. And there's been strong kind of push from plan sponsors that the 5 years of special payments is required because one needs actually enough runway to have kind of folks who are aiming to continue the ongoing operation. If one knows that a super priority is coming, as I say, it may very well reward particular types of economic actions to maximize one's return, either as a lender, either as an executive, or potentially as a sponsor.
Thank you.
Okay, we have MP Lambropoulos, then MP Assassi. Go ahead, MP Lambropoulos.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and Mr. Shine, thank you for your responses. I guess one of the questions that I've had since early on, since last meeting, but I did not ask it up until now, is what is the major difference between smaller and bigger sized businesses? Is there actually a difference when it comes to this bill, and how will they be impacted differently, or does it impact everyone pretty much the same?
So there's probably two contemplations of that. One is small employers that are plan sponsors. Those are increasingly infrequent, and then large employers, obviously, for which we see the vast majority of defined benefit pension plans being the norm. Those obviously are on offer for all. Severance, however, it's worth noting. So there's two kind of considerations from a small and medium-sized enterprise that's different potentially than a large employer. So obviously, if a small and medium-sized enterprise was a provider of a service or other economic transaction that was not paid at the time of a restructuring or liquidation, this would obviously see them moved to become an unsecured creditor and would be behind this super priority. And so obviously, if there's nothing left by the time we get to unsecured creditors as a function of super priority, then we might see small and medium-sized enterprises significantly asymmetrically impacted as a function of the role that might play within their overall well-being. The second is obviously that severance, which is the third component of this, is a super priority regardless of size of enterprise size. So while we may not see small and medium-sized enterprises have a pension, they may either have benefit plans or severance pay, and that would now have super priority over all other unsecured creditors and potentially secured creditors. And so that severance or benefit plans, I mean, one of the potential worst, if people were sort of being very worrisome, they might say a small and medium-sized enterprise that was actually offering something like a health or dental plan, now potentially knowing that that's a super priority, may see increased cost of credit because lenders now will need to factor that into the considerations that they have when lending. Similar things on the severance side. So I'd say, in terms of size of a firm and the potential impacts, it would vary based on the three categories: unfunded pension liabilities, group insurance plans, and then severance pay. And we'd have to think about it both from their role as sponsor, but then also potentially as creditor.
Okay, and with regards to severance pay, I was under the impression that regardless of this priority, obviously that pension plans are different because that has to do with interest, but that people do receive a severance regardless, and that this is already something done. Can you correct me if I'm wrong, and or if you have anything to say about that?
So what is currently a super priority is unpaid wages. And so unpaid wages that go essentially up to a maximum are automatically provided a super priority in any both restructuring and liquidation context. And so, and as I indicated last week, unfunded wages, actually the federal government in these cases, in the case of a liquidation or a restructuring, actually take the spot of the employee to be able to pay them out immediately, and then allow for the restructuring or liquidation to continue, and then ultimately the government would be recouped the portion that's currently a super priority, which $2,000. I'm looking at Mr. Morrison to make sure that I'm correct on that. He's nodding yes, excellent. But under the Wage Employer Protection Program, actually the employees able to get paid severance up to $7,200. And as I said, it's a super priority. What this would do would essentially take severance more generally and apply a super priority to it. And severance goes well beyond unpaid wages. It also includes potential severance payments and includes things like, separation payments in some cases, as we've indicated, that may actually be subject to that of executives. So if the severance is actually a very large portion of the employee pay packet in terms of a separation piece, that would actually now be subject to a super priority. And there's no delineation in this piece of legislation between the two in terms of either there's no cap on it, there's no discussion of that it's severance pay. So
Thank you very much. I see that there are several other hands up, so I may be back, but I'll leave the floor to someone else. Thanks.
Okay, so the speaking list, we have MP Assassi, MP Lemire, MP Badaway, and MP Poliev. So MP Assassi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I did hear from Mr. Shan was very, very helpful. I have no doubt that the intention behind this amendment is a good one. But again, I'm very much concerned about the unintended consequences. And the unintended consequences, as we heard from Mr. Shan, are several. First of all, as it relates to employees, or I should say, sorry, employers who already are in difficulty because of their large unfunded pensions. So it's not good for them. It's obviously doesn't change anything for lenders who face the risk of non-payment. And thirdly, I believe Mr. Shan, the third point he had made was, and this is a true concern, is that employers may very well decide to discontinue with defined pension plans, which obviously is not a good thing, and I don't think anyone on this committee would look forward to. But in addition to that, I do recall that some of the witnesses we actually heard from during the course of our deliberations, some of them which were there representing retiree groups, they also, as far as my memory serves, had indicated that there were a number of concerns as well, that providing this potential transition period could reduce some of the consequences, whether it was with respect to credit or that it would make restructurings very, very difficult. So given all of those concerns, which are obviously unintended, I was wondering if we could, as Mr. Shan did suggest, if we could go to the Department of Finance and ask them for some clarification as well as to what the consequences of providing a 3-year transition period would be.
So, Madam Chair, I'm not sure if that was directed at me. I would simply offer that that yes, the Department of Finance is the policy authority and in fact the regulator as it relates to the Pension Benefit Standards Act, and so given their role in the PBSA, they would have more and obviously being responsible for the overall macroeconomy, as opposed to the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development with responsibilities for the microeconomy. You know, there are macroeconomic considerations that I wouldn't be able to offer in terms of the degree to which this may impact things like credit markets or lending. We've spoken earlier about cost of credit. That's based on analysis that we've been able to do in concert with respect to super priority. But in terms of a 3-year transition period or others, as I said, they have considered and contemplated that in their role of pension regulator in the past as it relates to special payments. But I wouldn't be in a position to provide any clarity or granularity as to the potential implications of that.
So, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, is Mr. Morrison not here from Finance? No?
Mr. Morrison is here. He's on this. Mr. Morrison, would you like to respond to MP Assassi?
Oh, thank you very much. I'm actually here as a representative of the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development in support of Mr. Sean, and not with the Department of Finance.
Okay, my bad. And Mr. Mazziade? No,
so he's the law MP Assassi is the law clerk. But if you're looking for,
it was my understanding that we had a witness from Finance as well. Apologies.
But MP Assassi, if you're looking for additional answers with respect to the Department of Finance, perhaps we could communicate with them through the clerk to see if there's something specific that we could, if there's something outstanding. And I'm just going to turn to the clerk. Is this a possibility of getting that question to officials at Finance to answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, the committee is always free to ask for information from the departments via a letter from the chair or even an adopted motion here in committee. It wouldn't obviously be today. So there's that consideration.
So Madam Chair, things being what they are, and given that Mr. Morrison has graciously appeared before our committee, I was wondering if he would have anything to add to what we heard from Mr. Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Assassi. I take it that your question is in respect of the transition period that is before us in the amendment. As Mr. Sean points out, there is the potential for unintended consequences as a result of the transition period. I would also note that in addition to what Mr. Sean pointed out, there does appear to be and I'm not a legislative drafter, but there does appear to be a discrepancy in the drafting of the bill with respect to the treatment on royal assent and the treatment on coming into force. There is not a specific coming into force clause in the bill, so there is some discrepancy between that may require some additional drafting or correction.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. We'll now go to MP Lemire. Député Lemire, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to close the testimonies to move on to the vote on Clause 6, please. We can't do that. As long as there are outstanding questions, we can't close the debate because some members of Parliament have their hands up and they have the right to the floor. Do you have questions? Point of order, why can't we do it for ordinary witnesses and we can't do it for government witnesses? Because the credibility of those witnesses was questioned by a representative. This isn't for witnesses. I'm not closing the debate for witnesses. It's because members of Parliament still have questions. That's their privilege, and we can't close or put an end to the debate or end the debate for them as long as there are outstanding questions. Do you have a question, Mr. Lemire? Otherwise, I will move on to MP Badaway.
So point of order, Madam Chair.
We have a point of order on the floor, Mr. Duval.
and I thank you for what you just explained to us. We don't mind the questions, but they're repeating themselves, and we're getting the repeating answers. It's just going over and over to run out time. And I think that's very unfair to the Canadians that are looking for us to do the proper work and protect their pensions. But if they got anything that's relevant to ask, that's fine. But why are we getting the same questions and the same answers over and over?
So MP Duval, I appreciate it, but this is a new amendment that was circulated and just moved in committee about 20 minutes ago by a member of parliament. And so it is the right of all members of this committee to ask questions and debate the amendment that has been put, which I completely understand that the time restraints, but we also have to be mindful of the fact that it is the right of members of parliament to debate the amendment that is before the committee. So I have to rule that out of order. And so I will turn it back over to MP Badaway, who has the floor on this amendment. Go ahead, MP Badaway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have to confess, I'm my first time dealing with this issue, this bill on this committee, but I do appreciate the opportunity to weigh in. It is, in fact, something that I've been working on for quite some time, since 15, being elected into the House, dealing with organizations like CARP and others that have great concern with respect to protecting their pensions. But I have to ask a question that begs to be asked with respect to some of the dialogue that's been undertaken already this meeting, to Mr. Shen, and albeit he's probably the most professed in this area of the dialogue, and I want to appreciate his involvement and his I guess, for lack of a better word, his definitions today that he's provided the committee. But in 2019, in budget 2019, the government introduced amendments to the Pension Benefits Standards Act, and it prohibits a pension plan from providing the benefits and members' entitlement to benefits. And that being said, also being affected by the termination of said plan, how does that approach differ from the approach offered here that we're discussing overall in a broader, holistic view of this discussion, but also specifically to this amendment?
Yeah, many thanks for the question. I would defer to my colleague, Mr. Morrison, to discuss the changes to the Pension Benefit Standards Act that were part of the 2019 package related to retirement income security. And so would just invite Mr. Morrison to indicate what those changes included.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. I believe the amendments that you're speaking of are the clarifications in the Pension Benefit Standards Act that confirm that upon the wind-up or termination of a pension plan, the benefits that will be paid out under that plan will not be amended. And it confirms the rights of termination to entitlements that they would be on a wind-up or a termination, and it clarified what some people saw as a legislative gap that could have allowed for such an interpretation and potentially acted to the detriment of pensioners. There were also some other amendments, I believe, that related to the ability under the regulations to have pensioners have employers convert pension liabilities and have them assumed by insurance companies that would allow them to remove it from their balance sheet and have the, with the pension regulator's approval, have the ability to have greater security for the pensioners and not be at the same risk of employer insolvency because it was backed by the assets of a highly regulated insurance firm.
Thank you so much, Mr. Morrison. My apologies, Mr. Badaway. I'm jumping in because I'm getting the signal from the clerk that we have stopped because we don't have, we can't continue with translation services. So where we're at is we are on the amendment by MP Polyev. I'm going to take note of the list. Right now, we still have Mr. Badaway on the list, Mr. Polyev, MP Jacek, MP Johari, and MP Lambropoulos, and I believe MP Assasi has his hand up as well. I'm just going to take note of that so that when we come back again next meeting, we can we can continue where we left off. I want to thank everyone for being here and thank you for your patience. We're trying our best to get everything done. So I will work with the clerk to see when we can get this brought back to INDU and we can go from there. So with that, I want to thank everyone. Merci beaucoup pour votre témoignage.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the testimonial and thank you for the hard work. Thank you to the staff, interpreters and technical staff, as well as thank you to both our clerks.
And your helpful testimony. With that, I will call the meeting adjourned.